Hello and welcome to this month's webinar entitled On Purpose, the Role of Meaning in a Healthy Life. This is Gary Sams again, the Chief Wellness Officer for EBIC's Benefits Administration and Wellness, and I'm pleased to be back with you this month to talk about another really important kind of concept or topic when it comes to our own personal health and well-being, and that's the idea of purpose and meaning and having a meaningful life. You know, we typically talk about more of the physical aspects of health, things like our exercise or sleep or nutrition habits, those types of things. But we're starting to really find that our own well-being is a lot more than just those physical things. It's also our emotions, our mental health, our spiritual well-being as well, that has a big impact on the health that we experience. And when I was preparing for this presentation, I started to think about meaning and the big question, I guess you might say, the meaning of life. And I think for many of us, our first response to that question, what's the meaning of life, it probably comes out something to do with happiness. But what we're finding, and what the researchers are kind of finding, is that in reality what makes us happy is not so much the pursuit of happiness as it is the pursuit and having a meaningful, purposeful life, and that's kind of what brings us happiness. And so that's what I want to explore today, to provide some insights and some tips and a little information about how we can address purpose and meaning in our life, and so that it brings us a greater sense of joy and well-being and fulfillment. These are two of my favorite authors here, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Helen Keller, and they said about this topic of happiness and purpose these things. Emerson said, "The purpose of life is not to be happy, it is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well." And Helen Keller said, "True happiness is not attained through self-gratification, but through fidelity to a worthy purpose." So purpose becomes important in that definition, in that thought. And I thought I'd start with looking kind of at the current state of things from a happiness perspective, maybe kind of setting us up for why this pursuit of purpose and meaning is so important. And that is, unfortunately, that the science, it kind of isn't on our side right now as far as when the pollsters ask us about our happiness. It's not so good. And so I pulled out a couple points that kind of illustrate that. The first one is from the Harris, the big polling company, and this was featured in Time magazine, but it's the happiness index, and it currently stands at 31. And by the way, that's out of 100. And it was 34 the year before last, their last measurement, which was in 2015. And this is from 2016, by the way. I haven't seen 2017 yet. But it was 34 the previous year, 31 this year. And it's been in the low to mid 30s since they started calculating this particular index, the happiness index, in 2008. So that number, again, is a little bit challenging. And just a little side note to that, that particular study that I was looking at, I found some interesting things, what people had to say about happiness. And that was, I'm just going to kind of read this verbatim for you, some of the findings that they found. One, women are happier than men. Women's, their number was 33 in comparison to men being 29. People's annual income between people who had an annual income between 50,000 and 75,000 were happier than people who earned between 75,000 and 100,000. So that kind of speaks to that idea that money doesn't necessarily equate with happiness. People that had a college degree were happier than those without. Their number was 33 compared to 30. Married people were happier than unmarried, 34 versus 28. And people who are registered to vote are happier than those that aren't, 32 versus 30. So some interesting little tidbits there around happiness from their research. Another bullet point, according to the Gallup organization, only 33% of the U.S. workforce report being engaged in their work. And my feeling about that is that I think for a lot of people it's directly tied into this idea of purpose and meaning, and that perhaps they're not in a job that's providing enough meaning for them or enough purpose, and so they're kind of disengaged from what it is that they're doing. And so I think that's something that employers and we as wellness folks need to attend to, how to address the concept of meaning and purpose through someone's work. And this last one is really troubling. From 1999 through 2014, the age-adjusted suicide rate in the U.S. increased 24%, from 10.5 to 13 per 100,000 population, with the pace of increase greater after 2006. So again, some troubling statistics there when it comes to just the well-being of our society and the people within it. So how can we make an impact on those statistics? I want to profile a couple resources that I want to share with you today. And the first one is from Margie Worrell. She's a pretty well-known author around these topics of kind of empowerment and purpose, and she's written several books. One of them I have showcased here, Stop Playing Safe. But the primary source of information that I'm going to go through today comes from an article that she published in Forbes magazine called Do You Know Your Why? 4 Questions to Find Your Purpose. And I really like what she had to say in this article. And one of the things that she talked about was only when you know your why will you find the courage to take the risk needed to get ahead, stay motivated when the chips are down, and move your life onto an entirely new, more challenging, and more rewarding trajectory. While there's no one pathway for discovering your life's purpose, there are many ways you can gain deeper insight into yourself and a larger perspective on what it is that you have to offer the world. And so that's kind of how she sets up, this conversation around these 4 important questions. And so let's take a look at those individually. The first question is, and I really want you to think about this, what makes you come alive? And that's kind of pretty straightforward and simple, but when you think of it, what is it that really kind of excites you and that you get passionate about? I think that's what we're trying to get at here. Trying to, when we're thinking of our purpose, think of that in regards to what really makes you come alive and really what excites you. The second question to ask is, what are your innate strengths? And by innate strengths, those are the things that you know that you do really well. And you can even look at it from the perspective of sometimes when you're dealing with people, you wonder why they have such difficulty with a particular area, when for you, it kind of comes easy, and you know that you really are able to solve problems in that area really well. And that leads us to the third question, is where do you add the greatest value? And from that perspective, it's what problems you really enjoy solving and what problems you feel passionate about trying to solve. And from that perspective, that's where you can really add great value to yourself, your organization, your community, family, whomever. And then finally, and this is kind of the tougher one, I think, at least to think about from the perspective of, the fact we're all mortal and, we have this life to live. Well, how will you measure your life? How is it that you're going to, we talk about measurement in work and business all the time. Might be related to a sales quota or productivity or what have you. But when it comes to your life, how are you going to measure your life? And, I really like what she said in this regard, but she said, ironically, the things that matter most are rarely things. And that kind of gets back to earlier we were talking about the happiness statistics. When we ask people what makes them happy, it's not necessarily financial success, because the research has shown that even people that make more money aren't necessarily as happy as people that made a little bit less. So how are you going to measure your life? I think that most of us come to an understanding the older that we get that it's not so much about things, but about experiences and about really living to your purpose and finding meaning. So I have a couple more resources that I want to talk about as we continue this discussion on meaning and purpose. And the first one is from an author, Emily Estefany Smith, and she wrote a book that's been pretty popular here recently called The Power of Meaning: Crafting a Life That Matters. And in that book, she talks about 4 pillars of meaning, or kind of 4 foundational things that we should consider. And the first one is belonging. And by belonging, she says, based on who you are, not what you do. And that's an important distinction there, because sometimes I think we identify ourselves so much with what we do, we kind of forget that that's not necessarily who we are. And when we think of belonging, she found that people who feel a sense of belonging in their family, community, school, or wherever tend to believe that life is more worth living. It's more fulfilling and richer. And on the second one, purpose, purpose being a primary pillar, we've talked a little bit about that on the last slide. From her perspective, it's less about what you want than what you give. And similarly, she found that people who say that they found their calling, their purpose, if you will, more often view life as fulfilling and are happier. And so again, purpose becomes very important, and less about what you want and more about what you give. The third one is a little more, I don't know how to say it, maybe more esoteric, transcendence, and that is being connected to something larger that takes you out of time. So the psychologists talk about being in the flow, where you're so engaged in what it is that you're doing that you kind of lose a sense of time, and you have this kind of transcendent moment. And from her perspective, when we're talking about meaning, that transcendent state again is when you kind of lose yourself, and you're involved in something that's bigger than you, and that you can get so fully into again that you sort of lose track of time. I know for myself, sometimes when some of the hobbies that I'm involved in, whether it's wood carving or gardening or just working outside, I kind of lose all track of time because I'm so into what I'm doing. And the final one, storytelling. This is, from her words, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And I really kind of like the thought of that. And she said that people who have found deep meaning reflect on how they came to be themselves. So it's something that they actually think about. They reflect on how they came to be themselves and how their story may continue in the future. So the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And again, from her perspective, if we can sort of think about and address these four basic pillars: belonging, purpose, transcendence, storytelling, it really helps us to build this life that matters and that we find rewarding. The other resource, and I'm not going to provide any bullets or specific information from it, but that I wanted to share, was a book that was really important to me back when my late teens, early 20s. I read this book. It's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And this was a very, very popular book, and in fact, as it says here on the screen, more than 12 million copies in print worldwide. And I think it was the Library of Congress or the American Library Association. This book is on their top 10 most important books in America list. And Viktor Frankl, he was became a psychiatrist, but he was a prisoner of war in the concentration camps in World War II. And this book is based a lot on that experience that he had. But one of his observations in being, hopefully, none of us have experienced anything so horrific or are experiencing something in life that would have the challenges of being in a concentration camp as he was. But what he observed being there was that the people that had a real sense of purpose, had this strong meaning in their life, they were able to somehow cope with these horrific conditions. Where the people that he noticed that lost kind of that why to live, that meaning, very quickly didn't make it. And so for him, the concept of having this strong purpose or meaning really became everything. And to really look at that in our lives, and when we can uncover that, we can deal with how we need to live if we have a strong enough why to live. So that's certainly a book that's worth reading and that I recommend to everyone. So to close this up, as always, I really thank you for your time and attention today. Make sure that you complete the little quiz so that you get your credit for participating. And I would just say that this the topic again of purpose and meaning, it's not something that we've addressed before, but it's important for us to take some time to reflect and to think about our purpose and meaning. And if you do that, and sometimes it's not comfortable, but if you kind of can get through that part of it and really uncover those pillars that we just talked about, and answer those questions of why, if we're able to do that, I think it really brings another level of happiness and completeness to your life that otherwise you don't have. And so that's certainly what we're all about, helping to make sure that our well-being is on the right track. So again, really thank you for your time. Look forward to speaking with you again next month, and have a great day.